All right. Thank you, Esther. Whew. All right. Good morning. As our children are going, and they're going to come back and join us for communion, so don't worry. You'll get your kids back. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really glad to see everybody. As Esther said, today's a very special day. But more so for me, more so than our 21st anniversary, it's World Communion Sunday, a day where Christians all over the world, celebrate communion, and we remember that, although Christians may be all over the world in different local churches, but that we are one body. We are one body in Christ, right? And that we are all brothers and sisters. And that's what we are here to celebrate today. And as Esther mentioned, it's our 21st anniversary in our ministry. And I don't know about you guys, but I started thinking about that. And for young people, what does it mean to be 21? Yeah, maybe. But also, you're legal. You're responsible for yourself. How about, I'm giving you the other side. Being responsible. Yeah, if you're 21, you got to be responsible. And hopefully, if you're 21, it's a sign that you are now mature. Why is everybody laughing? But I want all of us to think about that. What does it mean to be 21? And today, we are starting a new series. We've got a banner up there for you. It's called Dwell, Learning to Live in the Presence of God. Right? And we're going to work through the book of Exodus. And if you would like to follow along, after you hear the message today, we want to invite you to go home and read 5 chapters, right? This throughout the week. That's not too bad, right? And each week, you can read 5 chapters. So next week, Pastor Brennan is going to preach on some passage from chapters 6 through 10, and it's going to go on like that. So we want to encourage you to do that. And it's a good way for all of us as we look through the book of Exodus, because I love Exodus, right? And Exodus, I think, really shows us how God is involved in the lives of the people, right? A lot of times we think, well, God's, we can go to church and do all this stuff, but God's like far away. We don't know God. God's not personal. But what we're reminded from these Old Testament stories is that God really is with us. Right? God is interacting, God is guiding, God is forgiving, God is healing, reconciling. God has this really intentional interaction with his people. But for all of us, as we look at the Gospel of Luke, and as we talk about what it means to dwell and live in the presence of God, let me ask you another question. Is learning easy? Yes? For some of you, so if you're brilliant, hey, more power to you, right? Learning is very easy. But sometimes, and actually most of the time, learning it just doesn't happen by itself, right? We have to try. We have to be intentional about it. How was it when you first picked up a violin? Was it easy? How about when you first picked up a math or a science book? Or engineering book, or a calculus book? Was it easy? No. I see some head shaking. No, it wasn't easy. How about when you first picked up a piano? Was that easy? Because if you picked one up, you're pretty strong. No. Boom, boom, boom. No, right? Things aren't easy. We have to really try, right? We have to learn it. In the same way, I really believe that we have to learn what it means to dwell in the presence of God. It doesn't just automatically happen when you become a Christian. And a lot of us, we live with that mentality. It doesn't work in the world. It doesn't work with violin, piano, math, study, whatever. But when it comes to being a believer, we think, oh, I'm a Christian. It should just come natural. It doesn't. That's not how the world works. That's not how life works. You have to learn how to live in the presence of God. And in this series, we're going to look at some stories from the book of Exodus. And I love it. I love the Old Testament. And through these stories, we're going to see how God is there all the time. And just like in our lives, a lot of times we don't realize that God is in our life. We forget God, but God is still there. And hopefully, as we look at these stories, that's what we're going to see. And today, we are going to read from the first chapter of the book of Exodus. So I hope you guys are you guys excited? Oh, I don't know about you, but I'm excited. I can see the excitement. Okay? All right. So let me give you a little introduction. Because Exodus, there's another book before Exodus. Do you guys remember what that book is? Yeah, something like Genesis, yeah. There's a drought in the land and a famine in the land, right? Main characters are Jacob and his sons. And the Israelites, they're so hungry they don't know what to do, but they hear that there's food in Egypt, so they go to Egypt. And when they get there, Jacob's sons, the brothers of Joseph, who have sold Joseph into slavery, find out that Joseph is now like the right hand of the Pharaoh. And they meet him and they're like, oh my gosh, we sold Joseph into slavery and now he's the right hand of the Pharaoh. What are we going to do? Ah! Right? They're scared. There's some crying. There's some hugging. But they're good. They're reconciled, right? So now the Israelites are living in Egypt. And a whole generation goes by. Jacob's sons all die. Joseph dies. 60-something years go by. And the Egyptians forget the good relationship that they had with the Israelites, with the Jews, right? And all of a sudden, the Egyptians start saying, hey, who are these people? Who are these foreigners? And what are they doing in our land? Does that sound familiar? There's too many of them. We got to keep them under control, right? And now, with that foundation, comes the passage for today. Listen for the word of the Lord. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and, in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Python and Ramses for the Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you act as midwives, meaning women who help pregnant women give birth, okay? When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them. They're strong. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could not hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket. Papyrus is like weeds, and they make paper, stuff like that out of it. She got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of the Pharaoh came down, to bathe at the river. While her attendants walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" The Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Whew, a lot of drama going on. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of water." And just to kind of, let's finish there. The word of the Lord. Moses in Hebrew is Moshe, and drew him out is Meshe. So they're just kind of she was playing with words and goes, "Oh, I drew him out. I'm going to name him Moses." So that's what's happening there. One of the things that we'll find is that in the Old Testament, and I don't know if you guys read a lot of the Old Testament, but a lot of the teaching is done through stories. So throughout this series, you might get, like today, a large chunk of a story, which hopefully, God will teach us something through it, right? Did you guys enjoy that story? It's an interesting one, right? And there are a lot of small details sometimes we forget if we're just watching a movie or, something like that. So it's good to read it. And in this story, the first thing that it says is, a new king arose over Egypt. And when I hear that, I don't know if you guys get that sense, but to me, I feel like there is this dark cloud that is set over the whole story. A new king arose over Egypt. And we know from what he did and what he is saying that he was not going to deal kindly with God's people. Right? Let's look at the next slide. First thing he says is, let's deal shrewdly with them, meaning, hey, we got to keep these people under our thumb. We got to control these people. Second thing he says is, let's set taskmasters over them and then oppress them with forced labor. Now they are becoming slaves to the Egyptians. Forced labor. And the Israelites were forced to build cities, Python, Ramses, all for the king. And these weren't just regular cities, they were supply cities, meaning they were storing up things for the Pharaoh in these cities. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites. They were busy. The Israelites were busy. They were getting worked a lot, right? And the Egyptians were on top of them. The Egyptians made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar, like cement, right? And with brick, and with every kind of field labor. They were getting worked in the city, outside the city, in the fields, everywhere that needed work, they were working it. And the book of Exodus emphasizes over and over again, they, meaning the Egyptians, they were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on the Israelites. And the king of Egypt tells, it's not enough. All of this, it's not enough. They can't keep the Israelites, God's people, under control. So he calls Hebrew midwives and says, hey, I want you to kill all the baby boys that are born. Oh my gosh. Isn't that crazy? It is. I think it is. But that's what's happening here. And the midwives, they don't do it. Instead, they let the baby boys live, right? So, now, the king of Egypt has to take some drastic measures. All right, I'm not leaving this up to the midwives. From now on, everybody, we're going to go and kill all the baby boys. Throw them in the Nile. They're going to be drowned. So now, from now on, no baby that is an Israelite can be had by families. Whew. Wow. It's in the midst of this dark scene comes a little baby boy. And this baby boy is only able to live in very large part because of some courageous women. Did you guys notice that in this story? Let me talk about some of these women. The midwives. Next, do we have a next slide? The midwives. Do you guys remember their name? Shiphrah and Puah, right? And most likely, they themselves didn't have families yet. Look at their names. Whoa. Shiphrah, Puah, right? They didn't, but they are faithful. They're faithful and they are worshiping God, and they say, we're not going to do this. Right? Two unlikely women, but they make up their mind. We're not going to follow the laws of this land if it means harming innocent children. What do? And what do they say to the Pharaoh? Did you guys catch that? Pharaoh, we can't kill these babies because we can't get there in time. These Israelite women, there's something going on with them. They're just popping those babies out. When we get there, they're already born and they're already in their arms. What are we going to do? So Moses lives. And it's interesting that these two women who have absolutely no biological or legal rights to this child, it is these two women who literally give birth to Moses. Then there's the mother, a woman who refuses to give up the child. And at this point, we don't even know who she is. We don't know her name. It's almost like she's not important. She goes against the law of the land and doesn't give up the baby boy, doesn't throw it in the river, doesn't allow other people to throw it in the river. A person who is practicing civil disobedience. She hides the child for 3 months. Can you imagine hiding a crying baby for 3 months? I saw a baby crying over here. I saw another parent over here sweating coming down. You go, oh my gosh. Then I saw another parent coming down when Esther was giving the children's message. The child was okay, but the father was like sweating. I don't want to mention any names, but Jason. Go, that's my child. I think he's going to do something. Right? He was fine. Leave him alone. 3 months hiding a crying baby. Finally, she has to let him go into the river. Not to death, but hopefully for life. She finds, and can you imagine what that would be like? If you had a baby, you had to make a basket and let it float down the river. How that must have made her feel inside. How it must have just torn her up, right? Then there's the princess. Courageous and an instrument of God in her own way. She finds the baby floating down the river. She takes pity on the baby and decides to keep him. Believe it or not, she is also a person of civil disobedience. Not only disobeying the law, but disobeying her father. Don't do it. Oh, when I go like this, those are my 2 daughters right there. Don't do it. She's willing to use her means, whether it's her money or her position, to save this baby. She was probably the only person in Egypt that could have saved it and gotten away with it, right? Just like a daughter gets away with stuff. I'm not going to look there, right? Because the father made the law. The whole country is following the law. But the daughter says, I'm going to keep this baby, right? Woo! She's a princess. Right? She gets to do whatever she wants. Literally, this was the beginning of what it meant to be a princess. But even her name is not mentioned in the story. Did you guys catch that? Her name is not mentioned either. Then there's the sister. Did you guys catch the little sister or the older sister? Courageous and a rebel, a young woman who watches over the baby brother like all sisters do. She watches over him as he floats down the river. It's this little girl that puts a plan together. She's working the system. She works it out so that the rich princess doesn't even have to take care of the baby. She goes up to the princess, "Oh, for a little fee, princess, I can get you a wet nurse." Do you guys know what a wet nurse is? Right? Like some moms, if they can't breastfeed, they used to have what's called a wet nurse who was, lactating. Is that what you call it? Lactating? And they would breastfeed that child, even though it's not theirs, they would breastfeed that child, right? And that's called a wet nurse. And she said, "Let me get you a wet nurse, someone who will breastfeed the baby and take care of him. You're a princess, you don't need to worry about that." And who does this little girl get to nurse the baby? She says, "Princess, I know just the person who's, going through that stuff right now. It's Moses' mom, her mom." But she doesn't tell the princess, "I got this woman." Brings this woman. Look, she can do it. This little girl is a genius. She is working the system. Now the baby's mom gets to raise the baby as the princess, princess's servant, and now she's even going to get paid for it. Right? She's brilliant. Yet even this little girl, her name is not mentioned. Why are the names of the women not mentioned here? And I want to invite you guys to think about that, because they're so courageous, they're so bold, they're rebels. Did they not have any names, do you guys think? No, they had names. They were people with families, lives just like us. I already told you the names of the midwives, but these other women had names too. The mother of Moses had a name. Her name was Jochebed. Right? So she had a name, but it's not mentioned here. The princess, her name was Bithia. Not mentioned here. The sister of Moses, that one some of us may know. Do you guys remember? Miriam? Yeah, right? They all had names, but not mentioned here. In such a big drama, you would think that these characters would be identified so that we could say, "Oh, yeah, keep track." But they are not mentioned. And I think the reason for not sharing their names at this point, they're mentioned later in the Bible, but not here, is because the story is not about them. It's not even about Moses. It's not about the midwives whose names are mentioned. Who is it about? I think the story, as we will see in the other stories in the book of Exodus, that it is about God. How God is constantly involved in every fabric of our life. Whether we think we are with God or without God, whether we think God is distant and far away or whether we think He is near, that God is involved in our life. When you're going through the worst of times, I think those are the times we really doubt whether God is there. And that's what this story is about. God's people were going through some of the worst of times when they had to give up their babies, when they were enslaved and had to work so hard. But the story still wasn't about them. I know this is a difficult lesson today, but through this story, what we see is that when we live our life and when we live and follow in the ways of Jesus, it's not about you. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's about God. It's about what God can do in your life. It's about what God can do through your life. It's about what God can do through the people around you. Even the unlikeliest of people in your life, God can work in their life. As I said, this is a big, hard pill to swallow. But as we begin talking about this, dwell, learning to live in the presence of God, I want to invite you. Look for the presence of God in your life. I don't know if you've done that. A lot of times we like to act like infants when it comes to our spirituality. God, here I am. You got to come to me. You got to come here. We've got to start learning to look for the presence of God, because God is there. Take a good look at the people around you. Our culture, we are so set on me, myself, and I. I got to take care of myself, and I can do it all on my own. Especially in this crowd, we got a lot of high accomplished people. I can do it all on my own. Why would you want to do it all on your own? Right? Why would you want to do it on your own when you can do it with somebody else? When you can walk along with somebody else, when you can do ministry with somebody else, when you can live life with somebody else. To me, that's exciting. A couple of weeks ago, a few families from Taiwan visited our church. And I'm always glad to see visitors. So, back in the lobby, somebody says, hey, here's a couple of new families. I say, hey, I'm chit-chatting with them, chit-chatting away and telling them about our church, asking them about them. And at the time, they didn't seem very talkative, right? Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was me, whatever, but I still chit-chat along. I'm just chit-chatting along, then I, said goodbye to them. And then just this past week, I got an email from the mom, which is very surprising. And within that, it's a long email, but let me just read a couple of things to you. She starts by saying, Dear Pastor Fred, it was so nice to meet you about 3 weeks ago in your church. We are the family that came from Taiwan. And she goes on, and she's very polite. She says, sorry that we didn't speak too much when we met because, our English isn't very good. So I said, okay, that's fine. And then she goes on, and she says, I don't know why God asked me to get in touch with you, but I just obey. So she's writing this email. And she says, I loved your church and the message, and thank you so much for your blessing. And here's the part. She says, thank you so much. And I didn't even know I was, blessing her in any way. She says, because I was not good on that day. She wasn't feeling well. After your blessing, actually, I didn't even notice what you were doing, or because I was I was thinking about my flight in my head. But leaving your church, I had joy in me. Even my husband noticed the difference and told me that we were blessed. Right? And I got to let you know, that's not just me. That's all of you. Right? You were a blessing to that family to a point where she felt healed. Right? That's a feel-good, touchy story. And I would like to end there, but life's not always like that, is it? The other day, I have to make a confession. When I'm driving, I get like road rage. Anybody like that? If you ride in my car, people notice right away. They start grabbing stuff. Why are you grabbing stuff? Especially when I'm pulling out of the back parking lot. I have it in reverse. From the top to the bottom, I'm usually going about 25, 30 miles, and then I cut it around the corner and zip out, and they're like, ah! Anyway, that's how I drive. But in the morning, I'm in front of my house, and there's an elementary school right next to our house. In the morning, there's a little traffic, and it gets on my nerves. And I'm parked like this, and some car, I get into my car, and I find that some car is parked facing me. I'm already thinking, you're parked the wrong way. You're supposed to park this way, right? And I'm like, annoyed, but then I look over, and the driver is still there. And it's this man, and he's on the phone, and he's crying. And he's not just like, drip crying. He's like snorting, and like, you know what I mean? Like crying really hard. And when I see that, all of a sudden, my heart just goes, oh. And I, just pray for him silently. And for about a minute or two, I'm sitting there. I don't turn on my engine. I'm scared now because I had these weird thoughts about him, getting angry. But now he's crying, making me feel bad. And I'm like, okay, do I talk to him? So I'm waiting, and he still won't get off the phone. So I'm assuming that he's getting some bad news or something, right? And he's just crying, and I think he's one of the teachers at the school. And he's crying and crying. And finally, I'm like, dang it, I'm going to be late. And I pull away. And even till today, my heart just doesn't sit right? Because there's a part of me that thinks, even if I had to wait 5, 10, 20 minutes, maybe I should have waited. And every day, since that time, it's been about a week and a half, I've been waiting to see his car there again, and it hasn't been there yet. I want you to pray for me that maybe I will see that car again. Maybe I will see him again and be able to talk to him. I really believe that as we celebrate our 21st anniversary, the big part is being mature. Not being like children anymore, but being mature in our faith. Looking for the presence of God everywhere in our life, in other people, looking for opportunities to serve, right? That we can share the grace of God. And in this upcoming year, I hope you will join me, that we take full advantage of all the opportunities that we have to be ministers of God. Amen.